For 1.5 solving equations, this is where I think people start to struggle a little bit with chapter 1. The first thing that we have going on in solving equations is solving something that's linear. Well, linear just doesn't have any squares or doesn't have any exponentials or logs or trig or roots or denominators or anything like that. So I think most people are fairly comfortable with this. All that essentially means is get all the x's on one side and the numbers on one side. And in this case, you end up getting 3. Um, Solving quadratics, same thing, but this time you want to get everything on the same side of the equation. This is a mistake here that some people would do, is basically taking out an x here. Well, we're not going to do that. Obviously, we're going to get everything into one side of the equation. We're going to factor, which I know a lot of you know how to do. And then we get into things that are a little bit more challenging. Okay, so factoring essentially with a problem like this. Well, when factoring doesn't work out, that's the issue. Well, in this case, we can get out a 3 to start, and we're left with x squared minus 4x plus 2. Well, if you try to factor this thing, it doesn't end up working. You could complete the square, as we'll do soon, but the best way to do this, I think, is with the quadratic formula, as you can see over in part A. With the quadratic formula, the 3 we can pretty much ignore at this point, where we can look at our a, b, and c values, where a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 4, and c is equal to 2. Well, when you do that, and when you have that, essentially what we're trying to do is go through and go x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And essentially that's your answer. I'm going to simplify it a tiny bit more just so you guys know essentially what I want for an answer here. Not just me, but all math teachers. We're going to have 4 plus or minus root 16 minus 8, which is 8 all over 2. A lot of people would leave it like that. Unfortunately, it can go a little bit more simplified even yet. So 4 plus or minus, this is essentially 2 root 2. And that's all over 2. And then lastly, we can take a 2 out of each of these. So you end up with 2 plus or minus root 2 all over 1. So that's my value. Lastly, we have 2 more solving equations. I know there's a lot of stuff here in this section, but solving equations with different denominators. In this case, a lot of times actually they're set up for you in the sense that they all have not common factors, but you can make a common multiple out of these. And if you guys can see, we got an x there, we got an x minus 3 there, we have an x minus 3 and an x plus 3 there. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the entire function by the least common multiple, which is essentially all of the factors multiplied together, and then you get rid of your denominators. Okay, so the x cancels in the first part. We have the x minus 3, canceling in the second part. We've got the x plus 3 and the x minus 3 canceling in the third part. And then once you have all this, same thing that we just did, get everything on one side of the equation, and then you can either factor or do the quadratic formula. In this case, factoring works. Last thing, check your answers. If you check 3 back in, you end up getting it. There's actually an asymptote at 3, so it doesn't work out, but negative 9 does. And then finally, the last one that I'm going to do is something with radicals in it. Well, you want to get rid of the radicals, essentially, and to do that, we're simply going to square both sides. Well, we could square both sides right now, or we can do a little bit of work first. I like doing a little bit of work first, just to make the squaring a little bit easier. I'm going to take the 1 over, so this is going to be 2x minus 1 equals negative root 2 minus x. Well, if you have this, now we want to square both sides. This ends up just being 2x minus 1 squared, which is not bad. And then when you square this, the negative goes away, and it's just 2 minus x on that side. On this side, we're left with 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. And then we could just solve it like we did before. Bring the x over, we're left with negative 3x. Bring the 2 over, we're left with minus 1, and we have a 4x squared. And in this case, we can go ahead and solve it using the quadratic formula or factoring again.